Ooh, that was much longer than I thought it was going to be. Hello, and welcome back to Garrison Talks. I'm your host, as always, Adam Slaver, here with Tyler Madigan. How we doing tonight?
Doing
Doing just
great.
great.
Enjoying
I
some rainy weather.
yeah, I was like, it's kind of wild because it's been like 70s around here. So I
Yeah, and
Better
think
then it
than
decided to
the weather they got in what is it, like Northern California? Whatever, it's like northwest coast. They got like 8 feet of snow or something. No, that's what I read.
really.
that's
Whoa.
Yeah.
insane. But yeah,
Whoa.
it's fun. It's fun because we're in like I think it's on like there's like 12 seasons for Midwest, right? For everyone that's not in the Midwest that listens. It goes like winter, then we get fall spring number one, and then we get winter number two, electric boogaloo, and then we get the spring of deception. We are currently in the spring of deception. And then
Yeah,
we
we
get
had
the yeah.
it was like 70 yesterday, and now it is full raining thunderstorms today. So and dropped like 10 degrees.
Yeah.
It's great.
But and then like it's gonna be all the way back. I think next week it gets down back to like the 30s again. And then we'll
Yep.
have our the third winter, and then we actually get into spring. And then it's like we get like 2 weeks of summer, and then it goes straight into fall.
Yeah.
No,
It's
right, no,
great.
I got it backwards. We have a long summer, and then like 2 weeks of fall, and then we're back in the winter.
Ah,
Lately,
that's right. That's right.
but yeah. So today we've got some fun topics. We're gonna talk. We're gonna continue. I didn't realize I did this unintentionally, but the topics we've been talking about have essentially been like Legion Worlds School for like the last like four weeks. Um, but it's worked out because it's right before Worlds.
It's
But
Worldsmiths.
Yeah.
yeah. Um, so we're gonna talk about act disparity today. So like when you're playing with high axe versus low axe, with low axe versus high axe, et cetera, like that, and a little bit like timing stuff there. And then we'll follow up with talk a little bit about armor, and then finish up with Inquisitors. Now that like we have like I think we've had solid confirmation for a while that they're going to be at Worlds, but like we have like solid confirmation now that they're at Worlds
Yes.
because we finally got like the rules and everything that come with them.
I believe they are dropping like March 15th, I think.
I believe 15th. So
Yeah.
like the,
So
the
here in
day
like
lists are
2
due. I
weeks.
believe. I believe it's literally the
The
day
day
lists are due.
before, I think. I think it's
The
the
day
day before.
Okay. But yeah, so that'll be fun. But before we get into everything, as a reminder for everyone, Indie Open's coming up on June 7th and 8th again.
7th and 8th.
It's gonna be a good time. Shooting for 80 again, as always. Hosting a church, so it's a Friday, Saturday, not Saturday, Sunday. But let's just put all of it into pretty much prize support, which is nice. But then the other thing is we finally gotten back on more media trains, and I believe someone here has written an article about prepping for Worlds.
Yep.
I was like, does that person want to talk a little bit about what they wrote?
Well,
really
it's
quickly?
the unofficial or official study guide, whatever you want to call it. I'd love it if you used it, but I just call it that. It's not accurate. But I think it's a good read. I think it's interesting. I went through some of the biggest tournaments of the year. I didn't include WTC because I just felt like the numbers, I don't want to say they were skewed because they wouldn't be, but there was a little bit of like there was a pairing process and things like that. And I know like specifically for the team that I played on for WTC, we had Brian Bear's list, which was really, really good against experimental droids, and like we faced him like 3 times, and we specifically paired him against that every single time. So I think like that is kind of a weird example of like you could kind of cherry pick matchups a little bit in that, which is the beauty of it, but also if you're trying to get straight data from it, whatever. But yeah, so the three I got information from was LVO, Cherokee, and the Nordics tournament, which was, I can't remember when that was. I think it was either the end of January or end of February.
End of February, I think.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a pretty interesting read because some of the numbers from that are pretty fascinating, and you can
Yeah,
get
I
an
mean,
idea of what you might see.
Absolutely. I think me personally, I was surprised by the amount of data you crunched through for that, Tyler. Like you really went deep into like looking at all the numbers. So there's definitely more than just our opinion with this, which is kind of a good insight for those that are looking to read it.
But our opinion's never wrong, so.
Yeah, it's mostly opinion, so that's the blessing of it, is that you're just getting blessed with my opinion throughout the entire article,
Yes.
and then sprinkles of data in there to actually sound like I know what I'm
Right.
talking about. So,
So, before we move on, where would one be able to, per se, read this article that's also number crunchy?
it's at the IndianapolisGarrison.com.
Oh, we're our blog there. Yep. All right. With all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about a little bit of act disparity and why it's so important in Legion. Because it's so unique to Legion because, like all these other war games are, I do all my stuff, you do all your stuff, back and forth like that. So, um, to start, I guess, what can we put a definition to act disparity? Like, how does it impact the game more so? Because I mean, like you can look at act disparity and see it's like 8 versus 10, but how does it impact
Yeah.
the game?
I can jump into that a little bit, and then you guys are welcome to follow up on how wrong I am. But I think the big thing with act disparity is for new players or those who are seasoned players, it's the gap. So if you're building an army, you might have 10 units, you might have 12 units, you might have 9, you might have 15, whatever it is. It's the gap between you and your opponent. Meaning, if my opponent has 8 activations or 8 units, they get to go with their units 8 times in a round. Meaning, it's each of them gets to go once. If I have 14, I get to go 14. So when they're done with their 8, because it's a back and forth system, you go, I go, I'm going to get X amount of turns to go unanswered. Meaning, if you're 8 and I'm 14, that gap is going to be whatever 8 minus 4 or 14 minus 8 is. I'm going to get that many, depending on who went first, to go unanswered. Meaning, those guys are free to just move up, take shots. They're free to just double move to try to charge into you. And so there's a gap there. There's that disparity of activations.
yeah, so I was actually just thinking about it. So, are we counting more or less activations like tokens that are in your bag? Or are we counting
We're including
units on
Dark
the?
Troopers in this.
Yeah,
Include Dark
it's
Troopers for specific. I mean, because
Yeah,
I
it's a little
think we
bit
can
more,
we can talk both sides of it because it matters two different ways. So
and it
right,
matters on
right.
both. Because
Yeah,
also, I mean, the big thing with that too is now we have a pass mechanic, which changes that equation a little bit too.
oh yeah.
that's true. Yeah, I'm thinking. I think the simplest way to look at it is if somebody has 10 activations and you have 9 activations, and you're playing a game of key positions or any objective really that like you have to put bodies on points. Um, the person with more activations from just the beginning of the game immediately has an advantage just because they have more scoreable units than their opponent. Obviously, things can transpire throughout the game, which I guess we're going to talk about a little bit, that you should do to mitigate that, or you should do to, go about having known that information that they have more scoreable units or whatever.
So you did mention it like a little bit, and like we were talked a little bit about it. What's the difference between tokens in the bag and bodies on the board in terms of acts? Like that's I think just touch on that really quick.
Yeah, so I guess the only two good examples of this are Implacable and Dark Troopers, and that's where Dark Troopers activate twice a turn, so they get 2 tokens. So you can count them as 2 activations, even though it's a single unit. I mentioned Darth Vader just because of his 1 pip. After he goes, he puts his order back in the bag. So he's kind of 2 activations for one round. Um, but the important thing about tokens that are in the bag is that it is dictating who is going last, which I think is the biggest advantage to having more tokens in the bag, is that you get to dictate more stuff after your opponent's already finished, and they can't respond until obviously command cards are played for the next round.
Yeah, just like Matt was saying, with you get to do X amount of things unanswered can be very very impactful.
Right, right.
Um. Okay. With okay, so now that we've established what we're looking at with this disparity, um, what do you think are like high act counts versus low act counts versus like normal act counts? Like,
Hmm.
what's your metric there? What's your guys' metric?
Well, I think, I mean, we've seen kind of the average shift over. I mean, I've been playing Legion for 5 years at this point, if not a little bit more. So I think the average has kind of shifted over the years, but I think it's been in a solid place for the past, I don't know, I'd say 2 years at least coming out of COVID to where average is about 10 still. I mean, now with the
Yeah.
pass activation, we have seen that some people are willing to drop into the 9 range, but 10 seems like the average. Unless you're clones, then you're going to trend around 9 or 8, which is okay. Um, and then you have the exceptions to that, which are more like Ewoks that are maxing out at 13, 14 activations, which is a huge high end.
And then you've also got stuff like on the low end, you've got Yoda arcs. I think is like 7 or 8.
Yeah, or you've got I know like Dave Grant that was running his 6 act list.
Six. Yeah.
So yeah,
All right. So I guess for a newer player, should I just be shooting for 10? Like, what is like the minimum that I should be looking at, just in general as a player? Actually, like, what is the minimum number of acts you think you need on the board to like have a good time consistently?
I would say if you're a new player starting out, I'd probably say shoot for about 9. I think that's a
mm.
pretty safe number. 10 is about the average. I would say 75% of lists fall in that 10 range. But I think nine's a good starting point. So
Yeah, I would agree with
So
that, especially if you're a newer player. 9 means that you're able to kind of keep up somewhat with the 10 act list, and that's just one less thing you have to learn. If you're only taking 9 units, that's only 9 units you got to kind of learn the ins and outs of, rather than trying to learn 10. Just take it slow, try to learn those units, and kind of get acclimated to the game before you really build into the higher acts.
yeah, I
yeah, and
think
with 9
it's
activations, it's like you're also filling out some of your guys with upgrades. Like I know droids, it's actually kind of hard to get the 9 activations without putting a lot of upgrades in your list.
Yeah,
And I've seen like a bunch of rebels kind of have the same thing where it's you kind of flesh out some of your activations a little bit, which is nice because you get to see what exactly you like and what you don't like. Maybe you like targeting scopes, but maybe you feel like it's useless. You know, little things like that.
absolutely.
speaking on factions. Do you think there's a big difference between like the amount of acts that like white save factions take versus red save factions? Is like generally it's like in my opinion it's always white saves are always higher, right?
Yeah, I mean
Yeah,
the
I do.
the units are
Oh, go ahead.
cheaper.
I mean, yeah, I mean that's fair, but like
No,
I
what were
don't
you gonna
know
say?
where I was going with that.
Yeah, I'll pick up for you. I kind of get what you're saying. I think when you're building a list, if you're looking to push into higher act counts, um, you kind of have to make that debate for yourself. Like, am I willing to lose some of the beef? I mean, like Tyler was saying, like one of the reasons we recommend that, if you're a newer player, you play kind of 9 acts is because you can beef up some of your core and start taking 6-man units. And there's this little bit more forgiveness, where if you're taking a little bit of heat, the fall off's not as good, meaning that only 2 guys die, but you're still shooting at 75% efficiency or whatever it would be. So, once you're building out to those like 12 acts, like for me, if I'm building out to like 12 acts and rebels, most of my stuff is going to be scraps. It's going to be like, oh, I've got 3 snipers. So they're 2-man squads. If they take stray shots, they're off the board. And so what does that mean? How am I willing to build out to those higher act counts and risk losing a lot of efficiency if I take early shots and units start falling off the board? So you kind of have to ask yourself, what's the give and take? Can I maintain some efficiency and some risk assessment by not having to build too wide?
Yeah, and activation preservation's a skill, I think, that you learn over time. And so, if you start off with 9, like Matt was saying, you could take some wounds and not feel as bad about it. But if you're running a bunch of strike teams or things like that, it's harder for a newer player to be able to like save those activations if they're in a dangerous spot, or maybe they take a wound and they feel bad that they have to hide them behind a wall. Whereas a more experienced player is kind of like, well, they did their job. Now they're just a point grabber. So, um, it's a bit of a skill that you have to accumulate over time.
Yeah, and of course, the important thing there also for like competitive sense is that that unit doesn't count for points defeated until that unit that leader dies. So that's
Yep.
very very impactful if he gets behind that wall. But okay, so we were talking. You started on it, Matt. But like, what? So when you're making like a high act list, what are you looking for? Like just in general, like what is the game plan behind it? Is it or like
No,
how?
that's a
There's
that's
a
a
better
good
way to phrase that
question.
question.
Yeah, but I think I get what you're saying. Because
Okay.
really, it comes down to what's my goal. Am I looking to like? I have 5 armies, but I mainly play rebels. So like for me, it's a little bit different. I've got two things that I pivot to. Am I running lots of long range guns, which is for rebels that's Cassian, that's 3 snipers, that's veterans with heavies, that's Mark twos. Am I really building out this gun line that's going to plink you to pieces and be able to just have as many guns as I want? Or am I wanting to kind of build out a higher act list to time out Ahsoka or somebody else that's a dive piece that wants to get in? Meaning that, like, kind of what Tyler was saying earlier, being able to have that ability to go last. If I can go last with Ahsoka or Operative Luke, and they can wait to kind of freely charge in, and then next turn go first and really get the swing, that's big for me. And so it kind of depends on which strategy I want to build into. For some factions, I feel like it's going to be different. Like Empire, if you're building higher acts, you're probably primarily just going in for guns.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, you have Vader, but most Vader lists are not going to be able to build out 12 acts. Now,
Yeah.
Inquisitors might change that, but we'll get to that in a little bit.
We'll
So,
I was looking at Empire lists earlier, and like Luke's, like for example, like Luke Cook's list from last year at Worlds, that 12 act Empire gun line had like 3 sniper strikes in it and 2 mortars, and so
hmm
like those are what 2 white save HPs and three red saves HP on like 6 units
yep,
of that 12. So like you are seeing a lot of that like kind of like filler versus meat, I think, in those higher acts.
Yeah, I think the thing that made his list work was that he had a couple heavy hitting, pieces like Boba and IG-88 that deterred off any sort of like force user dive or anything like that, because at being 12 acts, like the force user already wasn't on the other side of the table, wasn't already going to go last. So um, they would have to dive and then get return fire from like Boba or IG-88 or whatever the case may have been. But whenever I think about building a high act list, it's not just about filling out the activations. I think that's kind of a key point. I think there has to be a bit of a purpose. So like y'all were talking, like if you have some heavy hitting pieces that you want to save for last, or if you just have like some, like strike teams are a great example of something it's low health, but they can contribute to the fight. And if you kill a model out of them, they can go hide behind a building. They can grab a box. They can just contribute. And if they kill like 2 shore troopers over the course of a game, they've kind of already done their job. And so then they can just contribute to the points game, and you don't feel too bad about it. Um, Whereas if you take like a naked rebel trooper and you're playing bombing run or something, and like they don't have an objective, it's you feel a little
Okay.
worse about it just because they're not actually doing anything. They're not really contributing offensively, nor are they really contributing to the points game.
That's why you always run
yeah,
fleets. Okay, but yeah, so I think the important thing there with what we're saying about the axe is that we've all referenced it. Is that you still need to have like those 1 or 2 hard hitting pieces, those hammers in your list, even at like 12, 14 axe,
hmm
because you can't do damage otherwise. Essentially, is like whether it's the double bounties like in Luke Cook's list, or Ahsoka in the Rebels list, or like even like 2 units of Black Sun in Empire or something, or in CIS, that kind of thing. So like I think yeah, that's the important part. Is that you need to still have something there in general. The force saves. But let's swing it back over to the other side of the spectrum in like low X. What makes a low X list good enough to compete with the fact that you're giving your opponent such a timing advantage?
Mm.
Yeah, I think a great example of this is Lila Claire's list from both Worlds last year, and she's kind of updated it a little bit. So it's 7 activations, it's 5 kitted out Black Suns with the Vigos and this Magdet and frag grenades, and then you have a bus and Maul. And the point of that list is to just go right down your opponent's throat and do as much damage as you can. And sometimes you'll run into a scenario like on Recover the Supplies, where, I mean, Shadow Collective Maul is just insane on Recover the Supplies because of Cunning and the fact that he gets 3 actions. And every other objective, though, I think she just walks straight at you, and you can either kill it or you can't. And that list is beefy enough to where it's okay being 7 activations. You got a protective piece with the bus that can like shield off shots going into your Black Suns, and you have enough tricks to manage on some objectives, but otherwise you are just going straight at them, and it's all beefy activations. But not every list can replicate that, like Black Suns and Shadow Collective can. Or I think another good example is like clones with like Yoda, and you can kit out some clones to be like 7-ish activations, maybe 8, but you can get some really really hard hitting pieces in those 2 factions.
Yeah, I think kind of jumping on what Tyler's saying there, the good, really key piece to that is if you're playing an opponent and you're down by 2 or more activations, the best thing you can do is start clearing things off the table. And that's kind of what, like the Black Suns or the Pink Suns list, as it's been nicknamed, really is key to doing. It's only 7, but it's getting to its opponent really quick. It kills a full unit. It's usually robbing it of at least 80 to 90% efficiency, if not murdering it straight into the ground. And so it's going to quickly close that gap by just making its opponent pick things up off the table, to where if I'm killing a unit, now we only have, 2 activation disparity between us. Oh, I killed another one. Now we only have 1 act disparity. And so you just bring that gap lower and you close it, to where now the timing advantage is not in your opponent's favor. And you can do that sometimes just by figuring out which, like, if they've got strike teams, do you have maybe a orbital bombardment command card to help them pick those up really quickly? Whatever you can do to start hitting on weakened opponents. And you'll see good players do this a lot, where they'll focus fire units to just knowing kind of, hey, this unit's going to be the weakest, they're going to be the easiest to take off the table. Let's go ahead and mow that thing down.
So there is one thing I think I want to touch on for low X, and that I was thinking about was there's a lot of like a force multiplier or like really really tanky pieces in these low act counts, like because I think that's kind of like what ends up being the defining part of low act versus high act versus like average act, is that everything is beefy, everything will kill you, and everything is going to be a pain to kill. Um, so like I think that's kind of like a really important thing to hit. So it's like it's harder to do that with like rebels and CIS because your core that you have to take are really really squishy. But it's also easier to do in like clones, like I was saying, because you can have stuff like Yoda that acts as like a massive force multiplier with all of his shenanigans, along with like token sharing and everything. You gain a lot of efficiency back that makes it worthwhile to do these lower acts. I think is kind of really important. Um,
Yeah, and Matt touched on like the act discrepancy. I think that's really really the most important thing, and that's kind of the key focus of some of those lists. So, if you're running 6 or 7 acts and you're facing a 12 act list, you need to eventually close that gap. You can't let them have a 4 or 5 activation advantage on you the entire game. Sure, it's gonna be
Yeah.
that way for probably the first couple rounds, but you need to have a plan to like close the gap, more or less. And Lila Claire last year at Worlds was able to do that in every game that she played, except for the finals against Luke Cook, and that is eventually what lost her the game, because she couldn't start killing things off because she had to start hiding her pieces because Luke Cook just had an act advantage the whole time. So
So okay, so we've
Yeah.
talked a lot about playing low X into high X. What is the key when you're going high X into low X? Kind of like you're saying with like Luke Cook, like being able to keep that act advantage. How do you do so? Like how do you
Well, it's
keep your act advantage?
yeah, it's just the inverse. It's I need to keep my act advantage. I can't feed them things for free. Um, like obviously there's some tough scenarios. Like if there's a bus and Black Suns, you can't touch the Black Suns until they get out of the bus. So that's probably the only scenario though where you just straight up can't touch the unit before they get in to try equalizing
Hmm.
activations. Um, every other scenario, it's all about kiting, because usually a lot of these heavy hitting pieces are shorter range. Black Suns, they have a range 2 gun, but most of the time people are shooting their
Range
range
one.
1 pool with frags and the magdet. And so I think just if you have an act advantage that is significant, I think if you have an act advantage that's like 1 or 2, I don't think it's as big of a deal. Um, but if there is like a 3-ish act advantage, I think you really need to try to preserve that the best you can and not give them anything for free.
Yeah, and I think this
So
sets apart great players from decent players. Um, it is, oftentimes you'll find like if your strike team takes a wound, I've seen players who just like continue to shoot with them. It's oftentimes better in your advantage to take that sniper and hide it behind a building, even if it does nothing the rest of the game, just to preserve that act count. In a lot of scenarios, just to make sure you're not giving them 48 points for free or whatever it would be. Because often that's going to be, and so this is why sometimes you'll see it like some of the higher end play tournaments. Like if you watch the stream almost seems like it's a little bit boring because there's not a whole lot of give and take, and it's mostly because those players are not willing to trade pieces. They are being very preservative about that act disparity that they have, and they're trying to just preserve as many wounds as they can.
yeah, okay. So we talked. Yeah, so I think that's accurate, but it's also one of the things is timing. I think that comes with act disparity. Like the thing goes hand in hand with timing, right? So timing your units on what to go when also matters a lot,
Mm.
right? Because it's like that's how you keep your lead or you lose your lead, right? Um, so touching on timing a little bit, um, the difference between like timing neutral and timing reliant. I don't know what the inverse of timing neutral would be.
Timing
I'd say
dependent.
timing sensitive. Yeah,
That's
dependent.
probably those are both better words than what I said. So it works out. So how do you determine kind of like if a unit's timing neutral or timing dependent? And can that like change throughout a game? You think?
Oh, for sure. I think most of your more expensive pieces will be timing dependent, whether they want to go earlier or later in the round. A lot of the time, it's at the end of the round when you want to go with your big pieces because your opponent doesn't have as much time to respond um, until the next round, of course. So I think a lot of your core units will likely be timing neutral. Even if like you have like a shore trooper with a heavy or like a rebel vet with a gun, like something that's actually a little more expensive than what you would usually run. I think most of those are still timing neutral for the most part, because they have a really high floor for their activation and just a really low ceiling, so they're always going to be pretty consistent. Whether it's just shooting at range 4 or like double moving to get a better position, you're not too bothered either way about what exactly they do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, like, um, any unit that's over 125 points is timing sensitive. I mean, that's just, um, yeah, I mean, I think that's the way that now there's some exceptions, but for the most part, I think that holds true. If it's a high cost piece, it's going to be a timing sensitive unit. And that's something that I think a lot of newer players who jump into Legion from just other games have to kind of learn is the order control system. Where and I see this in a lot of 40k because like 40ks I go with my army and then you go, and so learning that is a big curve for a lot of them. at least in our area, that they have to kind of figure out. Okay, well, I have to actually start with my order on, Dooku. Otherwise, he's just going to get picked up off the table. Um, so,
Yeah, and I think a weird corner case scenario for when like a core would maybe be more timing sensitive is like if they have a medic or repair bot or something like that.
mhm.
Um, I see all the time. I play all the time with repair bots and droids, and just making sure that you can pull models back on the table after your opponent has shot at them, or whatever the case may be. Like I play a lot of Magna Guards, so when somebody puts in a ton of work to put in 2 wounds into a Magna Guard, finally kills a model, just being able to like put one back on the table at the end of the round is huge, especially because you can't restore a model the next round. So
Yep.
sometimes a lot of people will just wait with their stuff and go with their medics early in the round. But I think that that is the one scenario where you wanna wait with a core.
So, are there any other like kind of like more obvious scenarios like that where stuff is more timing dependent besides just like being having a glow stick and
I
having
think
a
the
medic?
I think the big one I can think of off the top of my head is clones. If you're throwing face-up orders out on clones, that unit you may want to just hold back for the option to fire support. You may not always need that option, but building out those options of like, hey, I'm going to throw out these orders on my core. Um, I could go with them right away to run, do an objective thing, or do that, or they could shoot right out of the gate. Or I could go with this unit, pull from my bag. I know I probably got a bunch of core in there already, or a bunch of other units that arcs or whatever. And so leaving that option open to fire support might be big because even if you weren't planning on doing it, the threat to your opponent means that you might have a kind of a zone of control.
Yeah, absolutely.
I had a thought and I lost it. Which is seems to be like the trend for today for me, but that's okay. We're doing great.
That's okay.
I think I think we talked quite a bit about timing and everything here. I think we've got us established a base. Is there anything that like we missed you guys can think of before we talk a
No,
little bit about armor?
I think just knowing the timing of your army, it will come with games played.
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna figure out what you want to go with earlier and what you want to go with later in the rounds, or vice versa. It just takes time, and usually it's different from faction to faction. So sticking with one faction for a little bit will definitely help you.
I remember what I was going to say. So I think it's also important when you do have these like this order control and these timing windows. It's important to not jump the gun because I get really excited when like I see my opponent's made a mistake with something and like pushes up a little too far there, a little too far, and the thing is just hanging there for me to shoot. There's times that I get like really like antsy and just go with something that's considered like a focus piece or like timing dependent piece that I will move up and shoot it and then lose
Tyler's
that
making
piece in
faces.
return. So I'd say
No,
like
something weird's going on with my computer.
a
Okay.
a little extra thing was just
Adam
don't
does have a
be like
tendency to get a little bit gun
recognize
happy.
yes, very very so. Recognize patience and be aware of the fact that hey, that thing is activated this round. It's not moving. I can shoot it whenever I want to.
You have time.
Um,
Yeah.
you have to, because like if you do it, if you get antsy and you do it right away, you just did the same thing that your opponent did and then made that massive blunder. So just be mindful and be patient.
Yeah, and one last thing I thought about. When list building, like once you kind of figure out the units that are timing sensitive and timing neutral, you don't want an army that is all of one or the other. You want to
Yep.
have a good variety of things that are timing sensitive. Hopefully, less things that are timing sensitive than that are timing neutral. That's just makes for a lot of ease of play because if you have everything that's timing sensitive, then that means something's going to have to go at a time you don't want it to.
Yep.
Do you have is there like a number that you normally go by for like how many timing sensitive pieces to have in a list?
I mean, it's more like a percentage. I'd say like 75% of my
Percentage.
list is timing neutral.
Yeah.
Like, I think personally, I usually shoot to have like at most like four things that are timing sensitive.
I think
Just
4
because
would be my
that's
max. Yeah,
yeah.
but I mean
Generally,
that's
it's 2 to 3.
yeah, and I think that's the exception of like if you're bringing bikes or something that's a little different or tauntauns. But yeah,
Okay, yeah. So it's just like just be mindful of that too, I guess, because that makes sense. Okay, let's talk a little bit about armor because armor is apparently I'm not gonna say apparently it is like the only thing I play. Despite the fact that I play rebels. Um, I have
Rebel
brought
armor is the best
yeah
armor.
yeah. I mean, I mean, like you're not wrong though.
It's the
Specifically the
funnest.
bus, it is the funnest.
It's the
Um,
most unique.
so I think
Yes, yes, it is.
armor, yeah, armor and vehicles in general, I think kind of fit in this because like some vehicles don't have armor, and some of them are speeders, but in general for objective play, they're largely the same because I think we referenced it last week when we were talking about thumbs and stuff. Um, the important thing about vehicles is that like they can't score on half of the objectives in the game, right? I think that's what it is. Is it half?
It's roughly 50%, something like that. Yeah,
Okay,
because they can
so
score key positions, um, payload,
breakthrough.
breakthrough, and bombing run. Technically, they can start with bombs on bombing run.
So it is
So
literally half of the objectives you
yeah,
can't play with armor.
yeah, 50%.
Um, so then my question to you guys becomes: why would I bring armor if I can't score on half of the objectives with them? Like just in general.
So I think that armor has gone through like a kind of a weird phase over the past like year and a couple months, because a year and a couple months ago is about when Dark Troopers came out. And I think that that was when everybody kind of changed their view on armored things. And what I mean by that is a lot of the time, this objective, I don't want to say it's a problem, but this objective scenario happened or has been around for 3 years, right? And so everybody kind of game planned a certain way over a year ago that if armor shows up on intercept the transmissions, like you're just going to ignore it because why wouldn't you? You
Hmm.
know, it's not going to
It
score.
can't
It's
score.
to that point, there was no armored unit in the game, in my opinion, that could ever make up more than the points it cost.
Yeah.
You see units like the AAT, which is kind of like scalpely. It doesn't throw many dice, but it's a good efficient dice. But it's just it doesn't throw that many. The
Isn't
Saber Tank was probably the closest thing to where you could have a unit that would just consistently like kill units, just because you could back it with so many tokens and whatnot. But the moment Dark Troopers came out, them being able to activate twice a turn and be able to score on those extra objectives just completely turned things upside down, because before people would be, well, I have XYZ in my deck, I don't need to worry about armor. Well, Dark Troopers, you cannot ignore Dark Troopers. You have
No,
to
you
have a
can't.
plan. Yeah, you have to have some sort of game plan to defend against Dark Troopers, because with them activating twice a turn, they will more than make up their points if you just ignore them. So,
Hmm.
with that, I think there was kind of a revolution of people just completely over spamming impact and critical and things like that, where they'd have a just absolute uh, prevalence of it. And so Dark Troopers then just couldn't handle dealing with lists like that. You saw, I think the highest ranking Dark Trooper player at Worlds last year was Andrew Tyrell, and he was running a Remnant list. So there was a lot of other things going on in that list other than the Dark Troopers.
did he make top 8 last year? I don't remember.
Uh, I think he was at least top 8.
I
I'm
think
just
so.
Okay,
thinking if he was
there
top
was
4 or
okay.
not.
I'm trying to remember because it was like I remember last year. I think it was like one Dark Trooper and then like 5 Blizzard or something. Off the top of my head. But yeah.
Yeah, it's
Um,
just so ever since then there's just been a prevalence of impact and critical, and that has just driven down the stock of every other armored unit, because before they already weren't like overly defensive or anything like that, but now when everything is kind of teched toward armor, it just makes it that much worse. Now, I think we've kind of eased off a little bit. I think lists that used to have like Impact 8 or Impact 10 or something ridiculous are now sitting more around like Impact 4 to 6, mixed in with
Right.
some critical. But I think for the most part, like armored units still just struggle because of that.
So then
Yeah, and I think
our yeah, go ahead, Matt.
I think also to add to that, the traditional role that armor has had, and when we say armor, we're probably talking about a heavy unit that's got a full armor keyword, um, that its whole role is to kind of be a sentry, meaning it's going to stick in one spot, it's going to shoot anything that it can see that moves, and it wants to do that for 6 turns. We're thinking AAT, we're thinking the saber tank, the ATSTs, predominantly in Tempest Force right now. If you're running 3 of those, its whole role is to just blast anything that moves. And so I think the problem with that is it's just has trouble closing that gap of
Yeah.
being able to kill enough to where your opponent can't score or can't do things. And so a lot of people did ease off of that for a long time. I think armor is still prevalent. It still can very much do what it wants to do. But if it's
Uh,
going to sentry like that, it's very one dimensional.
I was like, let me tell you about armor still being prevalent in the fact that I have notorious like I my tournament going experience for since Tempest has come out has been not notorious, I would say, but like it has very much perturbed me in that every single tournament I've gone to, except for Cherokee, in the last 8 months, which is a solid like dozen, I have played against triple ATSD Tempest at least once, despite the fact that there's only been one or two there. Um, so this, my answer is probably to this question is probably going to be way different than your guys's. Um, how much impact is enough impact in your list to prepare for armor, like in the event that you need to?
Matt, you go ahead on that one.
Ah, man.
Because
I
I
think
could
you need to.
start.
I think you need
Yeah,
to
Adam.
have. I think you need to have 4 at least, or at least a way to efficiently chip through something. Even if it's not 4, maybe you have critical backed up, or you've got like Ewoks have, log traps. That's maybe not. It's not a lot, but it's their answer. You need to have some kind of game plan in your back pocket of how do I deal with this particular type of armor, like an ATST. If you've got impact 1, you're not bringing that sucker down unless you really get lucky with critical. It's just not going down. Whereas if you run into Dark Troopers and you got Impact 1, you're up a creek. So you need to be able to answer those different types of threats.
Yeah, what's your number?
So my number is not necessarily a subjective number like Impact X in my list or something. I go by the rule of can I kill an ATST in 1 round, basically. Um, and that shows
Like,
Jeez.
like
are you factoring in saves with that, or are you just factoring like just wounds?
factoring
Like
in
I can force 11 wounds.
factoring in like saves and stuff as well. Because like 15 forcing roughly 15 saves in armor. Which again, I think that's a bit high for most people. I have PTSD at this point of ATSDs. I never want to see them again. I will remove them from the table as soon as I see them. Um, I think the reasonable number is like a round and a half to 2 rounds. So like 2 shots from everything that you've got that has impact. Because once you get through those 2 rounds, you're going to, if you're against a good armor player, like a good Tempest player, you're not going to have those pieces left, like because they will be off the table. So you need to plan accordingly. And I think 2 rounds, you should be able to kill an ATSC or a Dark Trooper unit.
Yeah, that's fair. So my number also isn't super objective. It's I would say it really just depends because you have characters out there like Boba Fett and Bosk, who, Boba Fett's got Impact 1, and Bosk don't even have Impact. But Bosk has cards like Lying in Wait, Reptilian Rampage, and
Yeah.
Surge's crit, and he has easy aim access as well. Boba Fett has, like the Boba rocket, which is impact. It's either impact 2 or 3.
Impact
Okay,
2.
it's impact 2, and then if you are able to combine it with the other pool, it's impact 3, and Surge crit and Pierce. Um,
Well, it's not Pierce if you're
Impact or
going Impact
Pierce. You
3.
could do one or
It's
the other.
Impact or
oh, I
Pierce.
see. I
Because
forgot
it's
that.
Impact
Yeah,
Arsenal
Arsenal
2.
too.
Yeah,
Dummy.
yeah. I forgot the guns are split up that way. But even still, um, yeah, like you have like these hero options that have really good efficient ways to kill armor, and I think that's a key thing. So like obviously again Bosk doesn't have any sort of impact, but he kills dark troopers better than almost any unit in the game. And
Yeah.
so I think like just for raw impact in a list, I think a good starting point is like 4 to 6. um but I think you also, unless you want to take more impact or you just don't have access to it, like experimental droids, we were just messaging about this today in our Discord, like unless you put everything with an impact gun, like I think the max impact you can get is like
8.
8
Yeah.
if you take the 2 B1 rockets and 2 B2 Haas, and you
Yeah.
have no sort of like playmaking impact at all. So I think like impact 4 to 6 plus some hero help, whether it's via cards or like they just have natty search crit or whatever the case may be.
I'll say,
Yeah, and I think also of note, it's nice to see like what you're talking about with experimental droids. Most of those units are going to have impact 1 or like impact 2. It's impact's going to be better the higher number it is, rather than throwing like 4 units with impact 1. Because yeah, you might be forcing those dark troopers to make one save with this rebel unit or one save with this clone unit. But like if you're forcing 3 or 4 saves, they're more likely to take those wounds. So you kind of need something that's a little bit higher impact, like Biston is a big one. I think like you're praying that impact 1 goes through so that you can get the ion off. Um, so
I'll say, with what Tyler's saying about hero cards and stuff, I do factor that into my stuff as well, because it's like when I'm saying like kill an ATSC or a Dark Trooper unit, I'm generally talking about the first 2 rounds of a game. Um, so it's like I'm factoring in, because like I think my list that I have and have been happy with impact in only has like a base impact 3, but it's on a land speeder with like the rocket gunner and the ion gunner. So that land speeder can double tap with the unstable R5, so it's effectively impact 6 in a round. Boba's throwing them an extra die. Boba's also got his own rocket card, which adds to that. So it's like I don't technically have more than like impact 3 in the list. Yeah, I literally don't have impact 3 in the more than impact 3 in the list, but I'm still able to kill an ATSC in probably 1 round. So it's just kind of things
yeah,
to think about there. Um, how does So let's say you don't meet this threshold to deal with armor, um, and there's an armor piece sitting across the table from you. How much does it like actually change your game plan, in terms of like winning the game?
oof.
I mean, it
think
just depends
for
on which armor piece it is.
and what objective you're playing. Because I think it comes down then at that point is you got to evaluate your win condition. Can I grab the center box and run away? Is it become a game of cat and mouse where I just have to run away from an ATST before it blast all my units to pieces, trying to hold the objective?
Let's ignore Dark
Or is
Troopers
it?
for this example, just because
Yeah,
you're kind
yeah,
of SOL anyway if you don't have armor impact for our Dark Troopers.
yeah, and I think that really comes down to, can I outplay the objective? Or, I mean, if I'm playing Tempest, can I kill their like 4 units that have thumbs that can pick up objectives, and just maybe I grab one thing and hide? And so it becomes a value of like, what's my win condition? What's best case scenario for me trying to fight this uphill battle?
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I think that you should be building an answer into your list before you even show up to the table. But again, there are examples like experimental droids where like, unless you want to go all out and tech for it, you just don't have a built-in option that you can utilize. So just really knowing the objectives and knowing your win conditions, like obviously, if you see triple ATST or Dark Troopers or something like that across the board, I think those are probably the 2 most egregious examples of like full armor skews. I think I think that you could. There's always going to be an answer objective wise on something that you can do.
Yeah, I think a good example of this though is I had to play um, kind of my I feel like my worst matchup at Gen Con this past year, where I had to play. I was playing a Sabine Ahsoka dodge spam list, and I roll up to the table, and he's got double AATs, both high velocity, throwing seven. I think it's like seven red and a white every turn into my face, range four, and I have very little impact, and so I have to basically. I think I pushed it to payload, and so I knew that he just wants to sit and just plink away at me. He's got critical guns. He's got two range four, tanks. The last thing he wants to do is push those payloads. And so I ended up winning just on the sheer fact that I could push my payload farther than him. A lot of things died on both sides of our table, but yeah, I mean, that just became a matter of knowing my win conditions and knowing what I could push into.
So I mean, that's pretty much. I think you guys covered what I was going to say. That it's mainly, I think it becomes the two main things is you got to be okay with acceptable casualties. Kind of like the Shrek
Mm-hmm.
movie where it's like many of you will die, but as a sacrifice I'm willing to make. Um,
But that is the sacrifice I'm willing to make.
then the other thing is really pushing it to a trooper objective and killing their troopers, right? Because like those are like the two ways you beat armor without killing armor.
And a lot of
Yeah.
people will initially hear that and say, "Well, dark troopers are troopers." Yes, but most dark trooper lists are like, while they are 9 activations or whatever, they're like 7
7 5.
units. So
Mm-hmm.
I guarantee you, unless you're playing a skew list like we were talking about earlier, I guarantee you have more than 7 activations. And so, sure, they might even some of them up, but they're going to have to put in that work to try to take activations off the table, knowing that that is their win condition.
Right.
Yeah, so just take those losses, baby. Embrace the rebel. Um, okay. I think we've covered armor. Do you guys want to talk a little bit about Inquisitors in the time we have left?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Because
I haven't had a chance to play with or against them yet, so I wonder
I've
if you
played a
all
little
have.
against them. Yeah, I have not played with
I've
them, but I'm not an Empire
I've
player, so.
played I've played precisely 2 games with them.
Hmm.
Um,
So, what are y'all's thoughts?
Oof.
I don't
I
think they're
think
as
they
bad
can
as people
really
make them
mess
out to
up your.
be. Oh,
I
sorry.
think they can really mess up your game plan. I think Adam and I are probably opposite ends of the spectrum here.
All right, where are
um,
you at, Adam?
I don't think they are, especially for like worlds. I'm thinking in terms of worlds right now. I don't think they're a thing to worry about. In the future, they might be. But I think right now, if we're specifically looking for worlds, people aren't going to be good enough at them because they came out literally a week before.
Yeah, and just
Um,
logistically, like
yeah,
getting them painted and all that stuff.
yeah. But the other thing is that like I don't think they're as oppressive as people make them out to be because there are you have to do there like there are so many moving parts to Inquisitors to make the unit actually like effective and do something worth its 240-ish points, 250-ish points, because like yeah, you are getting 2 units, but they are still 250 points worth of your units. um then there's like so many things that go into it, like you have to like with brother's card, like for give tokens over to sister, like there's you have to do that correctly, you have to time both of these units correctly, and I think they're more time independent than most things in the game. You have to really think about what actions you're taking because it's like you don't have free actions like most Jedi do. You're not
Hmm.
getting charged on brother until he's taken a bunch of wounds. You don't have master of the force, so like you're relying on your card recover. Um, so it just feels like there's a lot of moving parts that have to align for you to actually be able to pull off a lot of things with them.
Yeah, what about you, Matt?
I think they remind me a little bit of when Yoda first dropped. I mean, Yoda, when he first dropped, was like, he has 20 things he can do with his kit. He's not going to be able to do all of them at the same time. He may not even be able to do all of them in one game. He's got recyclable cards, he's got guidance, he's got his double attacks. They seem like they've got all of these things that they can do, like what you're saying, Adam. Um, I think a good player, I think is going to be able to figure out that puzzle box and make them explosive on the table. Specifically, I think if they're pairing him, like the two of them with Operative Vader, is a nightmare. Because you can
See,
still push it up to almost 10 activations and be pretty efficient. Um, and you've got 3 force users, and you're shutting down opponents' force pushes. They're all tearing through your lines. I mean, they can just wipe an entire corner of the board, and there's not a whole lot that your opponent can do to answer that.
see, to me, I think Vader's probably not the worst, but like one of the worst options to pair them with, honestly, because it's so many points. Um, and there's 12 command cards that they all want, or sorry, 11 command cards, but like they all want all of their command cards. I feel like because like a lot of like their game plan revolves around them.
Yes and no. I think they're kind of like Boba, where they can shine and flourish with all their command cards, but they can still operate at about 75% efficiency without them. Like, as
That's
long as
fair.
you've got Vader there to push units into them, who cares if he has charge?
See,
You
I
know,
would say I
you got
like,
3 force pushes or 3
yeah.
bursts
I
of
mean,
speeds, or
I was like, that is kind of the big appeal, right? Having 3 force pushes for that cheap, is
yeah,
kind of stupid. Um, but no, for me, it's like I want to pair them with like a bounty hunter. I think because you've got the Inquisitors to do the dirty work and get in melee and chop a bunch of things up. Because like they are still 11 wounds apiece and 11 dice in a round, just kind of
huh.
gross for a Jedi piece like that. And then, of course, they're canceling abilities and whatnot, demoralize. So like they're great. They make for really great disruptors. I think you want to. It's easier to capitalize on that with like Boba or Din, because they get to do their thing unimpeded. Whereas Vader's going to be in there anyway.
Yeah, I mean, there's some big plays you can make with Vader, though. I mean, you could do Fear and Dead Men turn 1 and just wait, and then triple move them into your opponent. And now you're like, okay, well, they're buried. Next turn, I'm playing
Is it going to new ways
Implacable
to
with Burst
motivate
of
them?
Speed, and new ways
Okay.
to motivate them.
I was
So
like,
they
that's
take a
not how that
wound.
works.
They take a wound and they get buried in your line, and next turn you get Implacable Burst of Speed Vader. And so now you've suddenly got 3 pieces buried in your line, turn 2, and you have to respond.
That's fair.
Um, and so they just offer a lot of threat that almost similar to Black Suns.
Yeah. So from somebody who hasn't played them, so obviously I'm not going to speak with experience here, but I feel like sometimes I have a pretty good grasp about looking at a unit and its stats and being able to like kind of apply it to the tabletop. I think they're very, very good. I just, people are saying like they're borderline broken, and I just don't see it.
Hmm.
I think they're very good. I just don't
Yeah,
see
agreed.
the part where people are saying that they are like way over the top. They're very cheap. They're very cheap access to force push, the cheapest by a large margin that we've ever seen, which totally fair. Um, but I think that's more, like if you take like Commander Luke, like sure, Commander Luke's 150 points. I'd be the first one to tell you I'd rather take an Inquisitor over Commander Luke. But like, if Commander Luke came down 30 points, like I wouldn't think he would be that much better than an Inquisitor. Like, and I don't think he would even like get spammed or whatever like people are implying.
Yeah,
I think that's just more of a. I think that the Inquisitors are appropriately priced, and just some of the other Jedi are way overcosted. Um,
yeah,
I mean, even looking at their command cards, like they have the sister 1-pip that gives them the extra defense dice and it gives them Indomitable. I think that's very, very good. I mean, the token card is okay. You have to
it's
do it in a
wonky.
specific order. Yeah, the card that recovers them, like I don't even know what the second half of this text is. I'm looking at it now. Like she gets like it's
So
just such a niche scenario. I don't know.
I was like, it's Ventress 1-pip, when she's hitting something with a face down order token that is also a commander or an operative.
Yeah, that just feels way
Yeah,
too
I mean,
niche.
I was like, there's like 3 different
Well,
checks right there.
and I think I agree with you. I don't think they're broken. I do think they offer a lot of efficiency in a faction that already sports operative Vader,
Oh
and that's
yeah,
why I say that is I think they just allow Vader to do what he does so much better, because now he's got a cushion for timing windows, for being pushed out of engagement, and so you have this almost this pillow of death that you just want to wrap your Vader in and just throw 3 Force users at your opponent, and you can do it
yeah.
fairly safely.
Yeah, and I just feel like a lot of people in the community just love to bring down the Nerf bat on things. Like, I think it's okay for something just to be really good.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know, like it's like Fifth Brother. Like he doesn't have native charge, he doesn't have jump. He's got enraged too, but like if you ignore him, like it could take him as much as 3 or 4 turns before he even engages.
yeah.
I,
The game I played against him, he didn't really start getting into the fight until round 4. When he did, it was rough. But
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, it took him some ramp to get up there. Now, granted, the other 2 in that list got in, but I do think, yeah, I mean, you can kind of push him around and ignore him for a while.
I I do think that overall, though, they are very skill expressive pieces, because of all those moving parts, that we've kind of been all talking about, with all like the checks and everything. A good player that knows how to pilot them well and is able to like mitigate and make sure all these pieces are hitting, all these parts are moving together, will absolutely dominate. I agree with that. Um,
yeah. I had somebody asking me why I didn't put him in my Worlds article. I do think that they are legitimately an archetype, like running a double Inquisitor gunline. A lot of people are calling them Quiznos, which I think is funny. Um, but
That is funny.
I
As
just
someone who worked at Quiznos,
I just don't think that logistically many people are going to be able to get them on the table. Just only having like from the release date. Now I guess some people could get them early, but the release date's the 15th, and round one is the 21st or 20th. I can't remember, but
21st.
most people will be
yeah,
traveling on like the 19th, 20th to get there. So
yeah, and
I
also with
mean,
this high pressure format of not being able to really drop a game, I think most people are just not kind of thinking about willing to risk it on a new unit that they don't have a lot of reps with.
yeah.
So
yeah,
I think we've talking for an hour and 3 minutes. I think we've touched on a lot of good things. Inquisitors are dumb. They're not going to be at Worlds. Stop freaking out. Um, but yeah. Anything else, gentlemen, you would like to touch on before we close it out?
no, I don't think so.
no, just
So,
start painting for Worlds now because you don't want to
Yeah,
be cramming
Adam.
that stuff last minute.
hey
Yeah,
now. I
Adam.
will let you know. Okay, we're gonna back up for a second here. I don't need your sass because my Worlds list is already painted. You want to know why? Because it's the only thing I've run for the last 8 months, so it had to be painted anyway.
Matt, he can't
So
paint
suck
something if he
that.
doesn't know what he's playing.
Hey, I know what I'm playing.
The
I know
waffle
what I'm
is real.
playing. Mostly. I've got two
Mostly.
lists picked out. Okay,
Hey, your
so it's
Waffle
like,
Are they
House
both
is open
painted?
24 hours, buddy.
I mean, this is
Yeah.
true. One of them
Yeah.
is not even touched. One of them is like not even half assembled yet. So,
So everything I said is true. Got it. Got it.
I'm running the other list now just to prove you wrong, out of spite.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Spite.
do we have any fun life advice, or are we leaving it on spite?
I probably got some. Um, yeah, as you get older, like me, and you start having dependents and houses and cars, do your taxes early rather than late. And I'm preaching mostly to myself there. Do your taxes early.
Or have a dad that's an accountant and he does it for you?
We can't all be
I
acupuncturists, Adam.
mean,